Hey guys, what's up? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I wanted to take a little bit of a break from talking about the X-Files, and I wanted to talk about a spin-off of the X-Files called The Lone Gunmen. This spin-off, if you're keeping up with like the chronology of the X-Files, it actually takes place like in the middle of season 8, but I wanted to go ahead and watch it in between seasons 7 and 8. And if you know absolutely nothing about the last two seasons of the X-Files, there is a minor spoiler for X-Files season 8 in The Lone Gunmen. So you might want to go ahead and watch like the first episode of season 8 and then go and watch the Lone Gunmen series if you're interested in watching this series. But if you are watching the X-Files and you don't want any spoilers at all, you may want to go ahead and watch some of season 8 before you jump into the Lone Gunmen spinoff. But I personally watched it in between season 7 and 8 so that I could just watch this series and then jump back into the X-Files. And personally, I really dug this series, a lot more than I thought I would. There were a couple reasons that I wasn't sure this series was going to work. Number one, spin-offs are always tricky. When you're doing a spin-off, it's important that you find characters from the parent series who can support their own series, but at the same time, removing them from the parent series is not going to hurt the parent series. That is a big one. And I feel like with the Lone Gunmen, they had good characters who fit that qualification because they only ever showed up in the X-Files roughly once or twice every season. So if you completely remove them from the X-Files, it wasn't going to hurt the X-Files in a big way. And if this series, if the Lone Gunmen had gone on for 5 more years and the X-Files had gone on for a few more years, you could have still had them show up every once in a while in the X-Files while still being the main characters in their own show, and that wouldn't have been a big deal. So I think they had good candidates for a spinoff in terms of that, in terms of you don't want to hurt the parent series. Where I was not so sure, where I was a little skeptical was, are the Lone Gunmen characters who can support their own series? And that was something that I was proven wrong on. I feel like these characters, when I first was watching the X-Files, before I watched the Lone Gunmen series, I kind of had a problem with the Lone Gunmen because the only one who I could ever really distinguish from the other two was Frohickey. And they all have unique visuals. I didn't get them confused visually, but as far as their personalities and their characteristics, I always felt like Frohickey stood out the most, and the other two just kind of were a blur. And there was one or two episodes of the X-Files that kind of focused more on Byers, but for the most part, I felt like the Lone Gunmen kind of blurred together, and they didn't really have their own separate, unique personalities. But watching this series, it provided what I feel like are good, fleshed out personalities and characteristics of these 3 characters. By the end of this 13-episode season, I feel like each of these characters have been explored and kind of developed a little bit more than what they were in the X-Files. So I feel like each of them are a little bit more closer to being 3-dimensional, fleshed out, real characters than what they were when they were in the X-Files. So I feel like that's a really positive pro in terms of this series. It really made these guys feel like they could have been lead characters in a show that lasted longer than this. And I'm not sure if this series was canceled or if they wanted it to only last this long. It seems like watching it that they wanted it to go longer, but then they were canceled before they could wrap everything up. And that is one minor problem that you might have with this series if you watch it. Even though it only lasted 13 episodes, it still ends on a cliffhanger. The second to last episode is actually the season finale, and it ends on a huge whammy cliffhanger episode, and then the very last episode feels like it actually should have been set before the second to last episode. It's just a normal episode where the Lone Gunmen are out, trying to find the truth and expose it to the world. But it's not a bad episode, it just doesn't feel like it should belong after the second to last episode. So that is another minor problem that I have with the series, is that it ends on a huge cliffhanger, and it seems like this cliffhanger is going to feed directly into an episode of season 8 or 9 of the X-Files. But I watched a documentary on YouTube after I was finished watching this series, and I should also mention, I don't have a physical copy of this series because the entire series, as of me recording this video, is on YouTube. So if you're interested in watching this show, but you're not sure if you want to fork out the money to buy the DVD, check on YouTube. It may still be on there, and you can see if you like it, watch a few episodes there. But I watched a documentary on YouTube that was kind of it must have been an extra feature on the DVD itself, because it talked a little bit about the making of each episode. And at the end of that documentary, it talked a little bit about these characters returning back to the X-Files, and it did spoil some pretty heavy stuff for these characters. And just from watching that documentary, I should mention, I have not seen X-Files seasons 8 or 9. Just from watching that documentary, I'm not sure if the X-Files kind of continued the cliffhanger from the second to last episode of this series. It doesn't look like they did, but maybe they did. I'll be very happy if they did continue that episode and pick up all the loose ends from this series, but I'm not sure if it did or not. But really, I enjoyed the series a lot more than I thought I did. It does a really good job of exploring and fleshing out the three main characters. The premise is one that they mention what they saw this premise as being in that documentary. They said it's Mission Impossible with three geeks, and I thought that was a really interesting way of describing this series. It feels very much like that was kind of the direction they were wanting to go in. There's also some other characters that I want to talk about before I end this review. One of them is basically he's like the fourth member of the Lone Gunmen, and his name is Jimmy Bond, and he was introduced in the second episode. And at the end of that episode, he tells them that he wants to join their group, he wants to help them fight lost causes, and whenever he was saying that, I was like, oh no, they're introducing this idiot into the series, this is going to be terrible. Turns out I was wrong once again. In the second episode, he's played as being much more of an idiot than he was later on. In later episodes, he's a lovable idiot, but he has a hidden intelligence that often the other characters don't see. There may be something going on that nobody picks up on except for Jimmy. And so they played him in such a way where he was a good counter to the other three characters. Langley, Byers, and Frohickey, they were all very similar characters. Even though this series endeavored to make them all different in different ways, they were still all pretty similar to each other. And so this series really needed another character to kind of be very different from them. And this is a good way to provide exposition. If all three of these characters know about something that they're investigating, this is a good way to provide exposition to the audience, because Jimmy probably doesn't know about it. And I ended up really enjoying Jimmy. I thought he was a very funny character. He added humor when humor needed to be added, but he was also kind of the unexpected heart of the group. There were times when the other three, it would seem like they were losing focus of their mission, and Jimmy was kind of there to say, hey, no, we don't need to be doing this. And I really enjoyed him. I did not expect to when I was watching the second episode that introduced him, but I really enjoyed him a lot in this series. And then there's the other character, who I guess you could say is sort of the fifth member of the Lone Gunmen, and that is Eve Vidal Harlow. And her name was an alias and an anagram of Lee Harvey Oswald, and she's introduced in the first episode of this series as a femme fatale who steals an item that the Lone Gunmen were trying to steal so that they could do an expose on it, and then they were going to give it back. And she steals it, and basically Frohickey blackmails her into giving it to them so that they can stop a terrorism plot. And basically, I'm really not sure that they did a good job of gelling this character with the rest of the series and the rest of the cast, because when they first introduce her, she is played up as she has no friends, no family, she's all about her mission of getting money for herself, and she steals stuff, she's a cat burglar, she uses her sexuality to get what she wants. That's the kind of character that they are playing her up as in the first episode. But then, not even 3 episodes later, she's the kind of character who just walks into headquarters and says, hey guys, what's going on? What are we doing today? And she doesn't strike me as the kind of character who would willingly be helping these guys without getting any money or any kind of compensation in return. She does not strike me as that kind of character when she's first introduced, but it feels like they wanted another kind of character to kind of play off the other characters, someone who is different than Jimmy and different from the other 3 guys, and so they created this character, but I don't think they did a good enough job of merging her into the group. I feel like they could have done a little bit more work to take this character who is a femme fatale cat burglar, who doesn't have any friends and doesn't really like these guys very much. They could have done a better job of making her an official part of the group without it seeming so forced. It felt very forced, and she was also my least favorite character. She would get on my nerves very frequently. There was at least 2 or 3 times in this series where she screwed these guys over on whatever story they were investigating. She would find the scoop herself, and then she would get the reward for it for herself, and she did that like 2 or 3 times, and it's a-okay when she does it, but then later on in the series, the guys, they ruin a job that she's on at least twice, and she is just furious at them anytime they do this. She acts like she's going to kill them because they ruined the job that she's on, and I'm thinking, lady, you did that to them at least 2 or 3 times. Why is it okay for you to do that, but it's not okay for them to do that? She kind of got on my nerves a little bit, but there were times where I felt like she added something that the series needed. So even though she's probably my least favorite part of this series, she's not the worst thing ever by any stretch of the imagination. At times, I felt like she really worked in the episodes, and then there were times where I felt like, this episode could have tried a little harder to make her work with the rest of the episode. But overall, I really enjoyed this episode. Really enjoyed this series. I'm kind of disappointed that it didn't last longer. I'm not sure if other people like this series or not. Personally, I like it better than any season of the X-Files. And if you're an X-Files fan, you may be saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. But bear in mind, I'm not an X-Files fan. I really haven't enjoyed any season of the series so far. So this was a nice little break from the X-Files for me. I really enjoyed it. I thought it worked a lot better than any season of the X-Files. And it was a nice little surprise for me. It showed me characters who I didn't think had the depths that they had. And it also made me care about characters who I didn't think I was going to care about. So those are my thoughts on the Lone Gunmen spinoff. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back with some other videos later this week and next week, so be sure to watch those if you want to. In the meantime, I'll see you guys later. Have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.